Happy Christopher Columbus Day! Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there are disappointed since last week I told you about how I think Christopher Columbus is a jerk and stories about him cutting off Indians' hands and feeding them as dog food. And I myself will admit that I'm going to miss Christopher Columbus Day. I would always celebrate the holiday, just all the stuff we do on Columbus Day. What are we going to do without that holiday? That was such a fun day. But anyways, when I said that, I didn't even realize that this is apparently a controversial subject. Right now, there are people protesting in the streets about Christopher Columbus and vandalizing his statue. And I just thought this was a fun fact that only I knew. I was like, oh, did you know Christopher Columbus did all of these terrible things? Now, the people that defend Christopher Columbus say that it was just a product of his time. And usually I would agree with that statement, but it did seem like even in his time, what he was doing was criminal, and his crewmates didn't even like what he was doing. And apparently he almost got arrested once for stripping an Indian woman down naked and then cutting off her tongue when she berated his family. But, I guess I could say something in Christopher Columbus's defense, because I do like to see everybody's viewpoint. I don't really like to get into controversial subjects if I can help it, but I will make this statement. I personally do think Christopher Columbus's expedition was a big accomplishment. I'm not one of those people that think it was a small thing. You always hear those, in my own personal opinion, idiots who say that Christopher Columbus landing in America wasn't really a big deal, that the Indians were there before him. He didn't really discover America. The Indians had been there for thousands of years, and that Leif Erikson was there before him too. But I don't really understand those arguments, to be honest. He was still an explorer that united the European continent with a continent no one had ever seen before, the North American continent, that people weren't even aware of for hundreds of years. So to say it wasn't a big accomplishment it was one of the biggest accomplishments in history. It would be like if we landed on the moon and found people living there that we didn't even know about until then. It's that kind of a sized accomplishment. Yeah, Christopher Columbus did something big. Even if you don't like the guy, you have to admit that. And I don't like the guy, but I am going to talk a little bit about his history because it's good to be informed about this and be able to make your own opinions, whether you think Christopher Columbus is a hero or not. So I'm going to tell you all the story of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus began his life in Spain, Geneva, and he began it with his father, Dominicus, and his mother, Susanna. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing everything here right. It is Spain, I used to call Don Quixote Don Quixote. I'm not very good with Spain names. That's my one weakness, though. Most of the time I can pronounce things pretty well. But anyways, he just began his life as a helper around the household. Eventually, he started looking to become an explorer, and although he was never really a scholarly man, he seemed interested in reading books about Marco Polo, and he'd make notes, so he knew a lot about navigation and things like that. And he eventually did get funding for his expedition after trying several different courts from Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. So he set off in 3 ships, the Nia, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And he journeyed for many miles, and he was actually a pretty good navigator, all in all. He knew how to use the winds, and yeah, he could have gone in a crash from some of the things that he did, but he managed to luck out, and he landed in the New World. Now, before landing in the New World, it is said that Christopher Columbus looked out and saw a bright white light shining in the sky. And he commented on this thing as being an almost divine spirit. And to this day, we still don't know what it was, although there are several theories, both mythical and scientific. But anyways, he ended up landing on this island, and there was all these jungles and snakes and birds and fruits of every kind. and Christopher Columbus ended up finding the indigenous people there, and they came up to him, and they didn't know what to make of him, but he saw gold on them, and he thought maybe they knew where the source of gold was, and he talked to them, and he was able to trade goods and stuff, and he even took a few Indians with him along the way. But anyways, he went across the islands visiting people. Some of them were very hostile to him. Some of them shot him with arrows, shot one of his men in the butt. But all in all, it went pretty well. He even met some mermaids along the way. They were sitting on some rocks, and he described them as being very ugly, which is funny because the history of the Fireside Tales, looking from the mermaid's point of view, mention how they found him to be kind of ugly. So anyways, Christopher Columbus had quite a few exciting adventures before going back, and he had all of these golds, and he had all of these native people, and Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand were thrilled by these stories. So anyways, he went on another expedition, and a lot of things happened during the second and third expedition, and I hate to go past them, but my sister gets mad whenever my videos are too long, so I am going to kind of skip through them to get to the fourth one. But basically during this time, he did most of the stuff you hear about it, and that was kind of controversial, to be honest. He used one woman as a sex slave, just allowed one of his sailors to just have sex with her and just basically rape her, you know, just with a whip, and it's all in the accounts. And he also just terrorized the people, all that stuff, became governor of one of the islands, and he was becoming pretty famous in Spain, where everyone was thinking of him as this grand explorer. But anyways, on his fourth expedition, one of his biggest adventures happened, one that a lot of people don't know about, which is why I've chosen to include it on in this story. Anyways, upon landing on one of the islands, he was shipwrecked, and he started living with the Indians there. And the Indians were going to kill him. They didn't trust him anymore. They thought that, you know, that he had made up a lot of the stuff about the riches and stuff in this other country. So they were going to kill him, but Christopher Columbus said that he would make the sun be removed from the sky at a certain time, and that he'd have the power to do this. Now, what was actually happening was that Christopher Columbus knew that a lunar eclipse was happening that very day. So they all gathered around, and Christopher Columbus raised up his hands, and at first they were afraid that it wasn't going to work. But then the sky got all dark, and Christopher Columbus looked like some mythical wizard standing there with his hands in the air, and all the Indians were frightened. And finally, they all agreed that Christopher Columbus should be allowed to live because he had all these magical powers, even though there were some Indians that doubted the story and thought that maybe he was up to something. But anyways, he ended up getting very sick, and he got gout, and he went back to his own homeland, and he ended up dying. One of the things that he mentioned in his books was that he'd always been hoping to find the Garden of Eden along his travels, but sadly enough, he never found that eternal place. He died without ever finding the Garden of Eden, and he spoke a lot about divinity and religion during his last days. So I guess there is that to say for him, whether you like him for that or not. But anyways, that is pretty much the story of Christopher Columbus. I'm sure that I skipped some stuff, but as you can see, I'm almost already at 9 minutes. But I hope you all enjoyed that story. At least you got to learn a little bit more about him, and will be able to make up your own mind, not just be controlled by the Seth Lewis media. You know, I'm not going to brainwash you to think whatever I want to think. But anyways, make up your own mind about Columbus. See you guys around.